commissioners
Yeah. So, just as means of introduction, Adam Veal, born and raised on Guemes. I'm almost 45 years old. But at one point, we always drive by the cemetery, and I had heard that the maintenance was going to, the person that was doing the maintenance didn't want to do it anymore, and so I told Dixon, one of the commissioners, I said, I want to mow the lawn. And he goes, well, I don't know. Kind of hemmed and hawed, and I told Angie, my wife, I think we're probably just fiancés at that time anyway. So she left the house and she comes back and she goes, you got the job. So look at me now, I'm a commissioner. Working my way up to the top.
Yeah. Oh, you mean working way to the bottom.
Is that a cemetery?
I'm a cemetery commissioner. I'm one of 3. It's an elected post. The first time, well, I've been on the ballot twice. One was to catch up, and then one was to start the term. Unopposed, no mudslinging was involved. Landslide. So anyway, I don't pretend to know everything about what's up here, and so therefore I'm hoping to ask a few people, if you don't mind, some things that might be of interest to the crowd to help me share this. The cemetery that you see is about 5 acres. There's also 5 acres on the back side that's not obviously cleared. And so this original property was donated by the Edens family in 1904. And the very first burial, however, was 1888 when an 8-year-old boy had died. And so his dad took him up to be buried next to a big rock up at the top. And then after, so 1888, or there had already been logging on the island for about 15 plus years. So it's not hard to imagine that since these trees aren't very old, but this was and still is the top of the hill with a fantastic view of the water, or at least cypress or sunset. So not exactly sure, but if this was their property and they were big loggers, it's not hard to say.
Yeah.
So the columns that you see were donated by the Guemes Island Improvement Club, and there was a formal dedication in 1934, 30 years after this whole ground was donated by the Eden family, and some granddaughters and relatives, they were here for the dedication of these. Before that, it was a wooden arch or wooden entrance. So let's go. You can just walk with me. Oh, sorry. So another quick story. So, like many times, you guys are, this is great, a lot of sheep. I was up here this summer, near the end of summer, trimming stones like I normally do anyway, and so a bunch of cars rolled up, and I kind of turned my trimmer off, and I hid in the woods, in plain sight. I didn't crouch down. And these ladies get out of their cars and they say, "Are you Adam Veal?" And I go, "Oh, what now? What did I do?" And they said, "You're supposed to meet us at our house to talk about cemetery stuff." And I was like, "Oh dear." And then anyway, and so I said, "Oh, I kind of remember something about that, but I'm sorry I'm not there, but this is better for me because I have cue cards that are in the ground, ready to go."
Yeah.
So it worked a lot more naturally than kind of just talking extemporaneously about things up here. So just follow me.
Hey, Adam, quick question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Any
Do you know how much acreage the Edens family owned at the time they dedicated this? Or
That's a good question.
It's on
When
there.
they first came to the island, the very first guy, his name was John J. Edens, and he was a colonel in the Civil War, and he was part of Sherman's March to the Sea. There's also a couple others that are up there that were part of Sherman's March to the Sea. And I looked that up today. There's about 60,000 troops that were involved with that, so it's not hard to imagine that most people were part of that. Anyway, he had 160 acres that was called preemptive, and that meant that as soon as it's available, I want it. And then 160 acres to homestead, and then another 160 acres to log. And so he started a logging company and called his brothers. He was the oldest of 9. Is that right?
9
He was,
I don't know.
He was the oldest son, so he came west. Sorry, took the steamer from Olympia up to Whatcom, before it was called Bellingham, and it was called Whatcom. And along the way, the skipper would kind of tour the islands that were. I mean, was originally Whatcom County, and so anyway, so the skipper on the steamer, he would kind of show them that there's islands out here that are available that have land that would be cheap. And so he started that. But anyway, so he called his brothers, this John J. Edens, and they came up and they helped him log. And it's at the height there had 30 people helping him log. And if you walk around any of these woods, there's stumps, and you can tell that it was kind of a big deal on Guemes. And then, interestingly, of course I've dug up here a few times, but I'm down a little bit further, maybe 2 feet down. There's a kind of a charred layer, so probably burned. So, any other questions to get started?
So he started out with about 480 acres? He started out with 3 parcels of 160, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's quite a chunk.
Yeah.
And as much as I know so far, I mean, I have this really great map. Wynn had it for me. I didn't blow it up, so it's a little spot. It's about 1917. I'll hand these out if you guys are interested. But follow me.
Don't be afraid to get up close so you can hear everything.
For church.
And Andy Leach.
And Andy Leach is now elected, and he'll start, I think, in November, or the first of the year.
When he wants to show up.
Unless he wants to show up. So this is Jerry Orrin Young. This is Yottie's husband. I was kind of hoping that, like I said, that she would show and I could ask. Jerry is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Received the Purple Heart for bravery. Died of cancer on the island. And according to the story that I read, he was a helicopter pilot, says Lieutenant Colonel, anyway. And he went to rescue some people on a hill that were trapped. And the commander said, don't go. And Jerry said, I'm going to get these people. So he goes to this hillside with his helicopter, lands and takes in a couple injured people. And this hill had already been under fire. And when he started to take off, the helicopter came under fire again at point blank. Down the helicopter, upside down, on fire. Jerry crawled out with one of his people that he rescued, and then radioed back and said, don't send anybody to get me, it's a trap.
Wow.
And he hid out, crawled around with burns, etc. for about 17 or 18 hours in the woods, kind of in Vietnam. So that's him. Is that about right?
Yep, but he was a Medal of Honor winner.
Okay.
Not just a Purple
He probably
Heart.
got a Purple Heart
Okay.
too.
Well, it says right. It says
Yep.
Medal of Honor and Purple Heart.
Yep.
He's buried next to Joe Louis, so he's got that going for him. But,
They're fighting all the time.
follow me.
And isn't that wait till we
They all come to me, and I was like, oh shoot, there's something. George Kingston was fairly original to the island, 1891, and his son Clayton, he died in Italy during World War II. I think that was pretty bloody. And furthermore, follow me. So this is Albert James Gray. He was an island kid, and I don't know if you can read this, but Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, aboard the USS Arizona.
So he
And-
died.
Yes. And he is not buried here. He's in Punch Bowl, Honolulu.
Where? That
I lose you all the time.
I know.
Flag should be at half mast.
So this is the
Oh,
Coslin spot.
September 11th.
The Coslins, they own the big White House farm that's on the hill on Edens as it heads down to the valley, which is now part of the Veal property. But Frank came here with Fanny. Fanny is related to a Forsey. Is that right? And so Harry Coslin died in action in France. And
First World War.
yes. And the story goes that there was a machine gun group that was ahead 25 yards, and they didn't keep their ammunition in the hole with them. And they ran out of ammunition. They were under heavy fire, and their commander called back for more ammunition, and nobody wanted to take it because it was certain death. And Harry Coslin said, "I got this." And his words were, "I'll take this." And from here to that cedar tree, that's the distance he had to carry the ammunition, and he didn't make it. He made it to the hole with the ammunition, but was mowed down by machine gun fire. There's a cross in France that's dedicated to him, but his body was returned to Guemes. Anything? Anybody want to add anything?
What's the Coslin family history on
They're pretty early, 1880s maybe. But homesteaders, kind of with a big farm on Edens Road, and then across from the community hall on Edens Road or on Guemes Island Road, there's a house, and that was a Coslin house. But they're just landowners. I think it was the kind of similar story. You know, they headed west looking for a good land, and that was it. And they knew somebody that knew something.
And Coslin Park is a connection.
Yes, of course. Coslin Park in Anacortes, if you've been to Anacortes, of course.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of rocks from the area. And it was designed and built by LaSalle. Is that right? And originally it was called the Great Northern Park because it was donated with land from the Great Northern Railroad. But as a dedication to the boys from the islands that gave their lives in the First World War. And so it's called Coslin Park, but he's a Guemes kid.
So what was the connection between the park in Anacortes and the Coslin family? That they had served in World War I or what?
Yes.
Yeah.
Harry Coslin died in service, in action, in World War I. And the park in Anacortes is dedicated to
Too bad.
him and the other
Yeah.
boys from the surrounding islands, Cyprus, Decatur. There was some houses on Cyprus that were homesteaded, etc. But boys that went and fought and died in World War I. Among them is Harry. Harry is also, is it 100 immortals Pershing? General Pershing had a list of the people who were killed in action that did something that was above and beyond and needed to be remembered, and so he was on that list of General Pershing, one of those people.
30 years old.
Yeah.
Is this where
Is this a kid? Park.
where's the rock for the first burial?
63 years together, they traveled the earth. He searched for stones. She wrote poems. I thought this is a petrified tree, and then I know the guy that cast this stuff. Yeah.
So whose is this?
This is Becky Rodman's parents, and they're related.
Holiday.
And Holiday, and they have a strong relation to the Edens. And then that's a pretty sweet, nice one also. That's a polished stone with all the things that were significant for this. This is Holiday Matchett's husband.
Isn't that amazing?
And he was a geologist.
No, he was a plant, an agricultural.
Wow, those are beautiful, aren't they?
I never saw that before. I didn't either. You were up here not long ago.
Well, Bob Matchett was a year behind me at Yuba City Union High School.
Oh.
Really? You both ended up
We
here.
both ended up here.
And here you are.
And here I am still.
Well, he's here too.
Brother.
Wasn't he interested in
hiker.
geology?
It was not geology.
No, I know. I thought he had an interest in it.
May have done.
Holiday's dead.
Somebody that thought he would appreciate it. And I don't know the name of it.
Walked away and he started
It's
talking.
just a legend I read, so.
Are you gonna write a book?
Family had a big farm on West Beach. As you drive down West Shore Drive, farm is cleared with kind of the house and the barn that it's in the middle. That was part of his. Also, I mean, there's a couple brothers up here, I'll mention those, but the Shriver family also owned what is now Ocean Acres. So that's where that came from.
How about the one right back there?
That's part of the family.
Oh, okay.
This is property owners on Guemes. Ian Woofenden has some of the property that was originally some of the Lewis property. Our family has 15 acres of that. Also, some of Butch Krieger has this property too, or did. Yeah,
Anybody
it
on
says
Lewis
it says
Lane has
father.
property there,
Father.
has his property.
Pardon?
Anybody on Lewis Lane has his
Anybody
property.
that's on Lewis Lane has something to do with this fellow's property. And then, according to Al Bush, Ray Lewis, who anyway, he drove the road grader on the island.
Lee
Lee Lewis, excuse me.
Lewis, yeah, yeah.
And it's probably Wesley. And so he drove a road grader on the island. All the roads were not paved, and so gravel roads, and he did the maintenance of the roads. And Al Bush said many times the road grader, of course, was on its side in the ditch.
Oh, not many times, probably a few.
William J. was the first burial up here, like I said, 1888, carried by his dad. There's a big rock right there, top of the hill, like I mentioned. That it's not hard to imagine that this was
Where's the big rock?
This is Willie. So this is Willie Eden's. This is original, of course. 8 years old.
Well, this is the first
Yeah.
burial on the
Yes.
cemetery.
Yes.
Can you imagine a view there?
It's hard to read sometimes. This is
Been good.
Mary. Mary Eden's. Yeah. 1851 to 1906. So the John Jay that we mention every once in a while, he was the first one here, but he didn't stay forever. 160 acres. And then he married a lady in Whatcom. And so this John Jay, this Colonel Eden's, he was kind of a big deal. He, as a kid, he listened to Henry Clay. His dad was a member of the Whig Party, opposed Andrew Jackson, etc. So he heard Henry Clay talk about patriotism and politics, etc. So anyway, so it's John Jay. When he goes to, so Skagit County was partitioned off to be Skagit County instead of Skagit, or instead of just Whatcom. So Whatcom was pretty much split in two. And so John Jay was one of the first senators, first representatives, state representatives for Skagit, and he was one of the founding board members of the Whatcom Normal School, which was the precursor to Western. So he was on the board until shortly before he died, I think. Any questions about these folks? Am I missing anything, Wayne?
Doing well.
Okay, thanks.
I was in junior high. I have to tell the story.
Yes, this is what I want, more of this.
I came with a friend from middle school named Eden Griggs.
Yes,
And her name,
yes,
Eden, comes from Eden, the Eden family.
yes.
So, it's not like I've been here a long time, but
Yeah.
I did come the first time when she had a birthday party here on Eden's in
Seaway Hollow.
Yeah,
Right.
Seaway Hollow. And
Well,
we
that
swung
family-
out over the water.
Yeah, the family's still here. The Griggs are still,
I met people on the mountain just this year that had that last name.
yeah.
Oh,
Griggs?
I think they're right. There's
yeah,
a,
no, Eden.
We just
Oh.
passed.
Yeah.
yeah, there's just a spot behind you that says Griggs.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yes.
Yeah, Eden Johnson gave a talk to the Historical Society not too long ago. But I'm going to mention a little anecdote about John Jay. It's hard to believe now, but John paid his crew in gold. And he was quite often traveling down to Olympia, and he stopped off in La Conner. I'm not sure why, but he had his payroll with him,
No, dear.
which was $2,500 in gold. And he knew the proprietor of the hotel at that time, and he asked him to hang on to the money, and he would be right back.
Oh dear.
And I forget the proprietor's name, but he took the bag of gold and took it upstairs and handed it. He didn't have a safe, and he handed it to his wife, and it was so heavy that it dropped on the floor, and there was gold everywhere. And they picked it up, and there was no receipt involved or anything. But when John Jay came back, he got his gold and made his pay.
Yeah. That's pretty great. So if you guys know where Seaway Hollow is, it's almost straight this direction, and it's a low spot. And I was talking to Ian Woofenden before you guys all came here, and any logging operation in the late 1800s, they're going to head to the water with their logs. And so what I mentioned was that, and I think I know this too, that Seaway Hollow was kind of the logging center, wasn't it, as far as a mill was down there? And so,
And and the blacksmith shack is still there.
awesome. Awesome. And so for supplies, they would row to La Conner for the things they needed. I think that was easier than the road to Bellingham. But a lot of the early homesteaders, it was a steamer that brought them up and kind of walked them around, and John Jay, he rode around the island, I think, looking for property, and he talked to people at homestead in different spots, and he thought, well, I got to do this one out here, right? No?
Variety.
This is
They're all men.
Forsey, and they were originals.
Here.
Born in 1858, died in 1906,
Famous
and kind of lost track, but Forsey, he had part of the farm for the veal farm, didn't he?
I believe it was across the road, but I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I think it was so
Or
again,
closer to the corner, maybe.
Hi, very nice. I'm Adam Veal.
Hello, Adam Beal.
How are you guys?
My daughter.
Excellent. So on Edens Road, as you head, we call it towards the farm, towards the valley, there's a white house that's on the hill. That's a Cosland property. And there's a westerly field that's open. And so this guy homesteaded there. There was a cabin in the woods. I don't think it's still there. But and this Forsey was related, his daughter married Cosland, so that's where they came from, the Coslands. Follow me. I'm just going to try to recall the best I can what Grandma told me. There was a Pinio that was crippled, had polio.
Yes, that's
right?
Jenny, and she lived where Everett.
Right, and so at the bottom of the farm hill is what we call it, into the valley.
We call it Pinio Hill.
Yeah, there's a big barn, and the Pinios, they farm the valley, and I think they use horses, right?
I think so. Yeah, yeah,
Horses.
of course.
That's as much as I know.
That's what my
Anybody else
grandpa-
with Pinio stories?
There-
I'm not too good.
There was a Pinio down at the ferry dock that they were related, but never spoke to each other. They were sisters, I think.
Nice.
Or brothers or
There's
something.
the ladies you're talking about.
Thank you, Ed.
So back here, This is Henry Hamill. He died in 2005, and then his mom was Sadie Hamill. And Hamill's, like I mentioned, it's a farm on West Shore as you're heading on West Shore Drive, and it kind of opens up, and there's the barn in the middle of the field and the old house out there. Sadie was a shriver, right? And so
What's a Shriver?
Shriver, like Solomon Shriver, who had underneath.
Okay.
Yes. And so the property went with them. And Henry Hamill was born and raised on Guemes. Talked like a sailor, but he was a logger. Anyway, he cleared the property where my mom and dad live. Had an old bulldozer that my dad had to get. And anyway, I just remember as a kid there was stump piles that they were burning at my mom and dad's place when they were clearing, and Henry would drive his bulldozer into these stump piles, and the embers would fly up, and as a 5 or 6 year old kid, I mean, that's about the best thing you've ever seen. David Butel, he is deceased, but he's not buried here, and he was a pretty famous carver on the island. And the Butel's place is where Judith Horton used to live, with that one. It's the White House across from the Bush's farm on Guemes Island Road. And that house was originally was Cahale, Earl Cahale and his family. That was a Cahale property.
Is that part of Henry Hamill up there, the one that's sort of
Sinking? No. This is Parsons, and they had a house down in Ocean Acres. My friend Peter Townsend and I used to visit. Her name is Josephine, but Joe and Ward Parsons, looking for candy probably. And then, anyway, so let's move. There's somewhere over there, and the Humbles. They have or had the property where the store is, and then that farmhouse that's right above it in the ferry line almost across from, is that Pheasant Run?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that's the Humble family. And that belonged to a gentleman who's in lots of books as far as Guemes goes. His name's Jack Kidd, and he's over on the other side, the center side. But we'll talk about him a little bit later. Any questions so far? Winston?
Just back to Sadie. The property that we bought was in Sadie Hamill's name. So there's another woman. And while we're on the subject, how about Louise Caillou Matthews, the mother of 14 children that lives, according to her daughter,
Rosie?
Maud Matthews Wooten.
Yes. Yeah.
And,
the Wooten family is over here just a little ways, but we can talk about them. Excellent. Anything else?
Oh, Lester Dunn.
So this is part of the Dunn family. I invited some Dunns here tonight, but they didn't get back to me. But I do know the family, and I'm trying to get them kind of involved with the Historical Society because one of their ancestors, well anyway, his name is Pat Dunn, and he's very active as far as telling the stories about the native folks from the island. So I don't have all that information. I was kind of hoping to show up, but this is part of Bud Ashback's family.
Oh, wow.
This is a Claude Reinhardt. They had a big chunk of property on North Beach, and I told these ladies that showed up when I was trimming hedges, I said, "Where's the commitment? They're not here." So follow me. There's so much over there. But this was the original Pioneer Cemetery here up on top of the hill with the older things that are upright. And so a lot of the names, your state representative Jeff Morris, his family has ties to Guemes. He was part of the Blackington family. And then according to Al Bush, he also used to mow the cemetery. He said that a lot of these areas were wrought iron fenced off, so it looked different than it does today. Any questions or comments so far?
We don't know, is there any-
Pardon?
Where is the border?
It's into the woods, about 20 feet. And then, so this is about 5 acres, like I mentioned, and then there's 5 acres on the backside of the hill. So this was donated by the Edens, and then the backside was Payne, I think. P-A-Y-N-E.
So how many graves are in the woods?
All of them. 2. Well, this has 2 headstones, or 2 markers for it, and then there's one just a little bit further down there. I think it's Spromberg.
That's wrong.
Sure there aren't more in there?
Well,
We don't know.
these are some of the warnings I heard the legends as I took my seat as a commissioner and said, don't go to the woods.
We don't go this way. Stay that way. Watch out, you got something on your ankle.
And they had about 8 or 9 lots over on West Shore, just a couple down from Bubbles, and my grandmother and dad grew up with Bubbles, so I know a lot about Bubbles. And my grandmother, my great-grandmother for the women, she had a orchestra in Mount Vernon, and I have the ribbons of all the different places they played in Bellingham at the turn of the century.
What was her name?
Her name was Grandma Joe. No.
Grandma.
No. Florence Sherman. It was Sherman's band and Sherman's orchestra. And the Duvals were her parents, and they were homesteaders up here, so the city of Duval is named after one of my relatives. My dad was a pharmacist in Mount Vernon. I was a small child in Anacortes. My dad was a pharmacist in Anacortes, and my mother was a radio announcer on KBRC radio in Mount Vernon area. So my family were kind of homesteaders out here. So I've been coming here since birth, but I've only lived on the island a couple of years. But
Excellent. Very nice.
Great.
Thanks.
that's all I got.
Say your family name again.
It was Sherman Schlonzer with my grandfather's a plaque at the fire department out in Mount Vernon, and Perkinson was my
So is there a headstone here?
There's 2 marble down there. Yeah.
And what's the name on the headstone?
Perkinson.
Perkinson.
All right.
And those were my great grandparents, but then they all the silver badges of the fire department. Someday we'll share.
Follow me, please. Map, we can make
Oh,
sure.
but there is something that documents
there's a
everything.
few things that are up here that you don't want to presume, I guess. Oh, go ahead, bury somebody there, but maybe not. This is the Lopp family.
Lop.
Can you tell us about the Lopps, please?
Hold on.
Was one of her sons. He originally had the gravel pit, the original gravel pit, sold it, and that's how it became the Aussie place. But anyway, so Mac Lopp.
You skipped George.
Yeah,
George Wilson.
Wilson bought it from Maclock.
Yeah, well, there's infamous people. I don't know who bought it from Mac.
Hard game.
So anyway, my aunt, let's see, okay, my Aunt Leona, great Aunt Leona, came with Lopp and had Hattie Adams, which I think is right here.
Henrietta, yeah.
Hattie, was her daughter. All right. So this was sister-brother. And she divorced, from what I understand, Lopp and married, let's see, what is this? She married
Dolph.
Dolph, but I'm trying to find who this is. I think this was Wiggy.
This is Elmer.
Yeah, but they call him Wiggy.
Okay.
Well, so he died of appendicitis when he was just young. I was trying to see how old, but I can't. 1922 to 1915 to 1922. He was very young.
7 years old.
And he was the one who was probably
Wiggy?
no, Wiggy I think might be over here, but he was, if he's 7 years old, then he was the one who was, there's a question about how he died, but either kicked in the stomach by a cow or he died of a bad accident. She lost all of her children. Here's Aunt Leona. And when my grandma came for her my great aunt, when my grandma, who is her sister, came here, it was pouring down rain, and the grave was filled with water. And when they put the casket in, she said, "I don't want to be buried on Guemes." So my grandma and grandpa are in Anacortes because she died in her 40s too. My grandma died in her 40s. And this one is James Locke. So that was her first husband. Second, third. She married, let's see. Now, she married Lop and then Dolph. Frank Dolph was probably, let's see, this is Wilbur, this is Wiggy. This is Wiggy. Wiggy died fairly young too, 21 to 34, and I think he was the appendicitis.
Yes.
Wasn't he also the one that wanted to become the next Dillinger?
Yes.
Oh, great.
And he had a nickname for everybody on the island. He had the nickname Wiggy. I don't know where, but everybody had a nickname, and he's the one responsible. And this is Norman. Norman, 1902 to 1936. So all these, her children died fairly young, except for the Locke children, which was Hattie and Mac. And his name was McGregor.
Isn't that great? I like it.
Well, was Hattie the one that had strawberries?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that was my.
She was the mom for Irene Allison.
Yes, Irene Allison's mom. And our new Lonnie.
Yeah, your
Lonnie, my cousin.
yeah.
Irene was his mother. So he's, yeah. So the Hattie Adams, Lop, and Dolph. Yeah, she had 3 children by Dolph and 2 by Lop, and they all died fairly.
So this is called the L section. Don't know why or when or because, but a lot of the names at some point were the L names. So, oh. Follow me. Story at all except that World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
Oh.
Yeah, major U.S. Air Force.
Sure.
The Schultz family is up here.
Again. More.
Hey, Sally and Sue. Can you tell us a little bit about the Stapps?
Can you come talk about the stats for us?
I didn't know Sylvia Carruthers was a staff.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but these are the assistants.
This is generation number 1 and number 2 of the Stapps. And my granddad and his wife, his pregnant wife, came to Anacortes on the train in 1913.
From
And
Illinois.
Yeah, from Illinois, a farm. And my granddad came to join his brother Ralph, who had a shoe store in Anacortes. So they ran Stapp Brothers Shoes for a while. And my grandmother was pregnant with little Tom. We call him Little Tom because he died when he was only 3 of meningitis. And so my grandparents came with their first daughter Sylvia and their first son Charles, our dad. And then after Tom died, they had 2 more children, Dickinson and Mary. So my grandmother used to say I had 2 batches of children. Had the older 2 and then the next. So this is our grandparents, their 5 children, and the 4 spouses of the ones that lived.
Wow. Tell me about the rocks surrounding this one.
Well, when we had Annie Marge, the family just sat in a circle and Sally brought rocks with,
No, I think the boys did.
oh, did they? So everybody got to walk up and
The
put
3
a
boys did
rock.
something so creative.
And so look at how long it's been there.
Yeah, they've
8
been there
years.
since '09.
So when Adam mows, he doesn't knock them off.
Of course not. So, was Sylvia with the United Nations?
No.
No. I thought there was
Worked
some
in New York.
at the building.
No, she
She did something at the White House.
was kind of an executive type of person.
She was a spy.
It was very mysterious.
Oh, she was CIA. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Now we're all compromised.
I was gonna say, now she has to kill us.
My grandmother, Mary Stapp. My dad married a Mary.
Yeah.
So that was the second Mary Stapp, and they named one. My grandparents named one of their children Mary. So when someone in town goes, "Oh, do you know Mary Stapp?" Well, yeah. And Mary Stapp taught in Anacortes for 100 years.
I had her. She was very strict.
Did you say, Adam, that this is the urn garden up here? Did you say that?
I didn't, but yes.
So what that means is that
They're small spots and you can put a lot of folks in them.
well, they're 4 by 3,
Yeah.
each of them, and so you can put ashes. So the Stapps own 7 of these 4 by 3 plots up here, and I'm gonna have Adam stake that out for us so I can bring my cousins up here and say, where do you want to be?
And Grace, when Grace was in a nursing home, Grace Ryberg, our neighbor on North Beach, and my good friend Karen Ryberg's mom, when she was in a nursing home, she didn't have a place in the cemetery, and there just happened to be a spot in our neighborhood.
Who was Eleanor?
Aunt Mary's partner, G.
Oh.
Yeah, they owned a summer camp together in Mount Vernon for many years.
She was in the army when she
Yeah.
was, she was a mathematician and she was in the army.
And Adam puts a flag
Flag,
here
yeah.
Memorial Day.
I do. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Was Grace upset that she didn't make 100?
She almost made it.
Dang, she was close.
Close.
But sure.
She died in December
Yeah.
and was born January 13th. So she almost.
Just one more month.
Yeah.
Well, and her mural is in town, right? By
It used to be at the store.
Oh, the Bill Everett.
Yeah, Bill Mitchell.
Yeah, Bill Mitchell caricature of her. Yeah.
And where is she now?
I'm not sure.
She was on the store for a long time. But
I think she's near where her house was on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
Joey Goss's.
Yeah, I think
Joey
she's
Goss
at
bought
Zap.
her property
Yeah.
and
Zap.
built Zap Lube.
Of course.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a cool story too, because after Grace died, Karen had to sell that house. So she put a little sign on the sidewalk that said house for sale. That same month, Joey sold his old Zap Lube to the hospital for $700,000. So he walks across the street, sees the sign. I'll buy that.
That's a great guy.
Yeah, he is.
The McFetrich family belongs to the McCracken family. Olive is Anne
Anne's mom.
McCracken's mom.
And this is Susie Everett's
they
grandmother.
have got to have been interesting people. I read all about them when I was doing church history, and he was a real character. That's all I know. He was always-
Well, McFetrich just lived in that little, it looks like a garage, but there's a house attached. If you drive down Lewis Lane and you forget to turn, you end up in that house.
Adam,
Yes?
here's the one, Susie Briggs.
Yeah, Susan Briggs.
is the famous.
She died about 10 years ago. She was super active.
Of what?
Hey, they're gonna do some stunts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because of the military?
Because of 9/11 and whatever they passed to clamp down on those freedoms.
And today's 9/11.
I know. The Gilkeys. They still have a place on North Beach, and then they own this door that where Eddie lives, right? That was a Gilkey store.
Yep.
And was it B who did hair on the side in that store?
Mm-hmm.
Hair on the side.
Well, there's if you drive by, well, originally it's a gas station.
Right.
So there's an old Chevron pump, a Chevron sign, but if you look real quick, there's this little cubby cutout that's off the side, and I think that's where she did her hair, yeah?
And the boards where my parents lived there, that we took it out and it has the square nails, you know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really
Yeah.
And they have 3 places on North Beach.
Yeah.
Both brothers and a sister.
Oh.
Madge,
Yeah. Well, they're related to the Thomases, right? Korean?
Oh, Korean, yeah.
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 That's
And they're related to Martha Colbert,
Yes.
and they had Gilkey Tugs.
Yes.
The what? Many years
They had a tugboat company.
Mm-hmm.
Who's under the trees?
Those are also, are those Gilkeys also?
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Oh, there's Armstrong.
Nell Gilkey.
So the lady that's beside Vivian Armstrong, as you're heading down, Lillian, sorry. As you're heading down North Beach towards the resort, before it kind of starts easing up the hill, and before is it, Pheasant Run? No.
Pheasant Run.
Paradise Lane? Whatever. Anyway, that's a spot that she has, and she was related to the Gilkeys. And then her daughter, Beth, married this fellow from the island, Benjestorf, who's down there. And they had 2 kids, and the kids were...
Well, she was married to Bill Mitchell before
She was married
that.
to Bill Mitchell, and then he had the car accident, and she kind of left him, yeah?
Yep.
Awesome.
Broke his neck, and that was it.
Helen Tucker was a Gilkey too. She had a
Oh,
place
yes.
on North.
Okay. Yeah. So Lillian's grandkids, they're about my age. Sundance, Blue Sky, Benjestorf, and Leaf Summer Song, Benjestorf.
It was the 70s.
70s, everybody was a hippie. Bunk. And Charlie had, I'm glad you're here, yay. So Charlie had the Ford dealership in Anacortes, yes? And it's where Starbucks and Kentucky Fried Chicken is today. Anyway, so one of Charlie's great gifts was to say, just take the car home and show your wife or whomever, right? And he had you there. And then so he was really good friends with Bill Everett Sr., yes? And didn't they want to be buried next to each other so they could continue to play cards?
That was the idea.
I never signed a page. You signed the title, signed everything.
He signed it for you?
Yeah.
I didn't like going
So,
That's why we called it Cheating Charlie's Lemon Orchard.
I wasn't gonna say that.
so furthermore, so Charlie, as you're heading towards the State Ferry, there's a restaurant that's boarded up that looks kind of nice. That's Charlie's, and that was his. And then the urban legend is that he lost that in a card game.
Probably.
Where's that? The Randy. It's now Randy's Pier or something.
My cousin Sandy worked at that place.
So you over there, Charlie. Oh, good. I'll bring up the record player and you guys go dancing.
Yeah, it's not the white one that's on the water side. It's the wood framed, of course, with a deck on it. It's on the left as you're heading towards the ferry. Yeah, it used to be clean and nice. It was a good.
It was a great restaurant.
Yeah, it's been boarded up a long time.
Yeah.
At least 10 years.
Oh, 20.
Why does she have to ask your name if she's a psychic? Moving on.
McEachrons are Karen's family. Karen Everett.
Baby girls, those?
I think so.
Oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding.
Push. Fantastic farmer from what I've read. He grew prize-winning 1-pound onions, etc. And a lot of people on the island wanted to get starts from John Kidd. And one place I read, he grew cantaloupes. Do you know?
Well, I want that on my gravestone.
Grandma Jane, almost a year ago, or more than a year ago this month, she died at age 95. Is it more than that? Yeah. 97. Her second husband was Murray Reed, and he's from Indiana. Her first husband was Bill. His name was Alan. And what they had in common, Bill and Jane, is that they met in college in Emporia, Kansas, and they both worked for their dinners or some of their meals. And so she worked at a restaurant, and she was impressed that he could carry this tray with one arm down some flights of curling stairs. So she thought he was kind of a man. But what they had in common is each of their families had lost the farm. Grandma's farm, Jane's family lost their farm, and then Alan or Bill, his family lost their farm. So short story long, I took Grandma Jane back to Kansas in 2010, and we just kind of bummed around, but I didn't have a plan, she did, and I said, I'll just drive you. Where do you want to start? So we flew into Kansas City, rented a car, and then bumped along different places, and went to her old college. We went to some lady's house that my grandma had not seen since 1942, and what a mind bender, you know, to have, 60 years pass and you haven't seen each other. And so Grandma Jane and this lady, I think her name was Edna, we walked up to this brick house, knocked on the door, and Grandma Jane said, "Would you recognize me if you saw me on the sidewalk?" And the lady said, "No." And they laughed. They thought that was great. So Bill died in 1971, and Murray Reed's wife died a year later, maybe?
I can't remember.
And Murray always they played cards together. It was kind of this group of people. Murray would only come in the summers. And Murray was always kind of smitten with Grandma Jane. And so he said, "If you'll make room in your heart, I'll make room in your closet." So the Murray Pavilion is dedicated to that guy, Murray, and he was a carpenter, he was a giver, and built a lot of houses for not a whole lot of dough for people that were in need, and it's kind of our spots. And then behind you guys is Alice Veal. That would be Alan Beal's mom. She died in 1984. It's my great-grandmother. She was 95 also.
She lived in the Guast house, right?
Right.
Yeah, so
long ways to go.
I don't know, the boys don't last too long, so those are the ladies. So Alice, where the Guasts live right now, she lived in that house. She moved out to Anacortes about in the 60s, I think, right? And my dad played Little League, and he would stay at Grandma's house. She lived in what they call the urban renewal in Anacortes. And she claimed that she never warmed up as soon as she got to Washington. And she lived here for like 30 years plus, right? She was an awesome bread maker and raisin bread particular. And then also you go to Grandma's house and would you like some candy? Well, of course you like some candy, and gotta have two, because two's a chew. And I'm like, oh, that's good stuff. But one of Grandma's stories, great-grandma, excuse me, was that she was baking a bread, and you had to let it rise, of course. And one of her girlfriends came to town, or came into her house and said, "Hey, let's go to town and have a good time." And Grandma said, "I can't leave right now, I'm baking bread. You can't stop the process." And the lady said, just bury it in the garden. Nobody will know. so grandma buried her. She buried her loaf of bread in the garden, and then when her husband came home, there was this mound rising up.
Yeah, she makes pretty flowers, right? That's good.
Yeah.
Here's one spot.
So Jane was willing to marry a part-timer, huh?
Well, he wanted to be, yeah. Well, Murray was a great guy regardless, and Grandma said, "Oh, I have my friends. I don't want to, I don't want another husband. I've already given up on one anyway." And she goes, "I can do this. A lot of my friends don't have husbands, etc." But Murray was pretty persistent. Yeah.
What's that house on Guemes Island Road there? He built that. It's partially into the ground. It's on, I know he built that house.
His daughter's house?
Murray had his hands on lots of houses. He helped Win with his house. He helped my dad build his first house. There's a log house that's on your way towards the resort. It's a yellow log, vertical logs on the bluff.
Casperson's.
Yeah, Casperson's house. That was kind of a project, I guess, right? Kind of on the rocks, right?
Indeed.
Joan Palmer. Joan Palmer, he helped her out with hers. Wow. I think the Murray story that I like to tell is that they were doing some remodeling on the fire hall, and somebody said, "Oh, this door isn't plumb," and Murray kind of walks up to it, looks at it, and then whacks it with his hammer, and he goes, "Now it's plumb."
Well, you missed one little part.
Oh.
He felt like he was being accused of putting a door in that wasn't plumb.
Wasn't plumb.
He looked at it and he said, "That door is so plumb, it's over plumb." Then he tapped it.
I hope somebody's taking notes. Who's taking notes?
So all this says is a one bubble, and this lady was Henrietta,
Henrietta.
and she was a
Boy, that's a huge
bubble dancer for the Follies. She was a seductress,
exotic
bubble
dancer.
I could do the whole thing, but I won't. But anyway,
dancer.
Exotic dancer. There you go.
Ah, yes.
so I think there's some controversy when she buried one of her husbands, Doc, and Doc Finley was pretty instrumental in getting power to the island. And anyway, so she put this here and scratched it in with a nail, etc., and cleaned it up. But I think the cemetery commissioners at the time kind of shook their fingers at her. But she was a character. This lady has a piece of property that's kind of down on Lervik as you go past Morgan's home. Anyways, she was kind of an explorer. She would come to the island as a child, yes? And she would play with the Indian kids that supposedly, allegedly. Anyway, and so she carved things and made things out of concrete, and she was nonetheless a character. And they wanted to put Bubble on the phone book, and it kind of in her exotic gear. And my grandma said,
and
Agnes said, no. They said, I don't think she was a very decent person. I think that's kind of how it went. And so I think after Grandma died, you guys go ahead and went and did that, right?
No, not yet. It's
Not yet.
coming.
It's coming.
Next year.
So Bubble is immortalized when you go to the museum in Anacortes. There's a kind of a colorful sculpture of some lady with some pearls kind of on and kind of in a... Exactly. And that's her.
She used to complain about the hippies on Guemes, and
Really?
my sister-in-law said she was the original.
And didn't she canoe to Alaska?
She said that she did, yes. She claims to have canoed to Alaska.
She had a three-legged
yeah,
dog.
so
Hop in there.
Wynn maybe probably knows way more than I do about Bubble. Go ahead.
No, I don't know a lot, but I did go through her notebooks after she died, and nowhere in there does it say she paddled to Alaska. She paddled in Alaska, took her canoe up there with her motorhome.
That makes more sense.
Oh, okay.
It's a long paddle.
But she is buried here.
Yes. Yes. That's about all I have. I could talk about any of these others. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, when my dad was a little boy and growing up, there was an Indian on Lerwick. There was a Indian log house that's now disintegrated, but when I was a child, it was still there. And Indian Joe, and she used to ride in her canoe that we now have in there, playing her accordion, and she had a black lab, and Joe, and they would sing, and my dad would talk about how it would echo across the water. But then my mother played accordion, and my cousin Tim's mother played accordion, and so there were times with my mom and Bubbles, and they were all playing accordions together. I remember as a child. And when I was 10, she was building the roundhouse, and we were up there for a month that summer, and so she sort of recruited me as her assistant, and she was teaching me how to collect. There was an abundance of starfish then, not like now. Collect starfish, and then how to collect them and boil them and scrape everything out of them and dry the shells and shellac them. And I spent 3 weeks with her doing that, so there was all these starfish for the interior of the house. And then after she had sculpted the mermaids, they were topless, and she was getting a little bit of flack about that, and my mom, who is an artist seamstress person, made ornamental little decorative bras for all the mermaids. Well, I was cleaning starfish. So it was fun. And then later on, one day she was sculpting, sitting in front. The house was built. This was in the end of her life, but she was still sitting there when I came up to visit, putting concrete in this thing that's not even there anymore, but she was sculpting it. And she just looked at me and she said, "Aren't you really glad that you don't have a really large nose?" And I said,
weird.
"Yes." But then as she was in her little wheelchair, electric wheelchair, and she would come down, and I spent a couple weeks up there one time, and I thought all the years she entertained me, and so I'm kind of creative, and so I started making things to hang in the windows that faced the road that she was driving by just to entertain her, and she started realizing they were changing every day, and so it was sort of a game. And it was a fun memory to do that. She would slow down, and I'd be spying to see if she was looking, because I kept the curtains closed, but they were hanging on the outside so she could see them.
There's another story.
Really nice woman to me.
Do you think she influenced your creativity?
She influenced
I
mine.
definitely think she influenced my creativity.
She influenced a lot of people.
I'm not sure.
1991?
91? Yeah.
1991?
Oh, she was only
When wasn't
91.
the dragon that's at the
I think she was
community
Marie's
center?
age.
Didn't she do that?
And
Well,
I think she was
I
Marie's
think-
age.
That's a
Bill Mitchell.
Bill
What?
Mitchell,
Was she Marie's
but
age?
she had
So-
those
So
dragons on
she
her
touched
house.
3 generations in our family.
So she didn't put the dates on
It
it.
has it
Yeah.
says one bubble. It's pretty
Oh, that's it.
austere.
But that is why we had the round, I called them bubbles in the luminary parade, is I
excellent.
wanted to end up with one for every year of her life, and each year we'll do a new theme, but this year they have the Indian designs on them, in honor of her love of the natives of the island.
Very nice.
There's a story. She was a great quilt maker. Quilt maker, yeah. Beautiful quilts, birds, but she had one that was a man with just the loincloth on, and she invited, or the Women's Society quilters wanted to go see the quilts, and so they came to her house to see the quilts, and one lady just couldn't resist lifting up the flap. On the flap there was full detail. And she went, and Bubbles just looked at her and said, "Well, you shouldn't have lifted it up." That's great. That's great.